Well, I've been in the business of advising companies on global trends for over 10 years now, and before that I was doing it on a much less formal basis. And people ask me, what have you got wrong? Well, I guess I've got loads of things wrong over the years, but they've usually been issues of timing rather than event. In fact, most debates in the future, or rather about the future, are debates over by when will something happen, rather than whether it will happen at all. And the future can be divided into three components, really. There are things which are stark-ravingly obvious for anyone who's got an ounce of common sense and are trends more or less locked in concrete. Let's, for example, look at the ageing situation in Europe. Now, that's been obvious for anyone who's studied demographics for the last 25 years. The pensions crisis, that's been obvious too. It's a simple function of the number of people that were born a number of years ago. It's nothing to do really, it's not, I mean, of course it's to do with how long we live, but it's not the main reason. If people were still having 4 or 5 children per family, we would not have a pensions crisis. I rest my case. Now, so that particular trend is solid, it's there, and barring a global catastrophe, a bird flu pandemic or something like that, then that trend is there. Here's another one, the fall of telecom costs towards zero. It was obvious back as early as 1978, 79, 90, 80, as indeed the continued doubling of computer power. We could argue about whether the 18-month Moore's law will continue to be sustained for the foreseeable future, but the fundamental expectation that computers will continue to increase in power and will fall in cost dramatically has been fulfilled many, many times over, and will continue to be so. You've got other issues of the with this telco costs, computer costs, the efficiencies of technology. These are all obvious things, and yet people overlook them. They are obvious, predictable, and they will transform our lives. And yet there are other things which are wild cards. These are low probability but high impact possibilities, which can come crashing into our world. Things like the subprime crisis in the United States, but generic risks, that we will have new financial scandals, or that there will be new mis-selling problems, or that in this complex globalized world there'll be new sources of instability where contagious forces affect one country after another. Those are obvious and have been predicted widely, and indeed I predicted them and talked about them over 10 years ago in the first edition of FutureWise. So relatively solid things, yes. General trends, yes. The rise of tribalism, the rise of terrorism, cultural conflicts, they were pretty obvious. September 11, did I have to rewrite FutureWise? Not really. When SARS burst onto the scene, did I have to rewrite a chapter? No, I just added the words "like SARS" onto a section that was already there about mutant viruses. Why? Mutant viruses are there every year. They've been there for decades. They usually emerge in Southeast Asia. Hong Kong is a favourite place. SARS was a thoroughly predictable event, and there'll be many more things like it in the future. We just need to have a mature view of these things. And yet there are other things which are much more difficult to pin down. For example, by when will cheques entirely cease to be used, written cheques in the European Union? Difficult to tell. By when will the amount of cash in circulation have halved from what it is in 1980? Very difficult to say. So issues of timing, great debate. It keeps people like me in business. But issues in timing are extremely important, because if you come to market too early with a product, you're out of business. If you come too late, you could be out of the game. So timing is everything, and that requires a great sophistication, attention to detail, and is a tough call. So examples of timing issues which I've got wrong are things like, I thought that video links would have taken off earlier than they did. I thought that we'd all be using video phones much more heavily than we are. Instead, we're just using them to record clips and then we're putting them up online. We're not actually using them for live video. I'd underestimated how self-conscious people are in front of cameras. They love to take video clips and amuse each other with them, and then post their biggest disasters up in a sanitized way where they've been able to pre-screen rather than just allow streams of living consciousness to come out over the airways from one friend to another. People are quite inhibited at the thought of being called on a video phone. You see, the future's about emotion, it's not about technology. So that's an issue which I got wrong. The slow acceptance of video conferencing as a substitute for meetings, I got wrong. It'll come, but it's taking longer than I thought. The spread of HIV in Europe which I predicted back in 1987, 88, I got wrong. It's slower than I thought. But everything else that I predicted about the AIDS epidemic sadly has been more than fulfilled. Those predictions I made 20 years ago. So, yep, you get some things right, some things you don't. But as I say, it's usually issues of timing rather than of absolute substance. But the fundamental patterns of the future are more or less set. And I've just revised FutureWise for the third time into a fourth edition in 2007. And as part of that discipline, I went through the first edition of FutureWise, which is widely available. You can get it for virtually nothing on eBay. You know, it was quite a sobering thing to see what did I get wrong. And on the whole, it was issues of timing. Some things, you know, happened a bit earlier than I thought, a bit later than I thought. Some things haven't happened yet, but I'm still sure that they will. But very few things were fundamentally miscalled. I guess it's probably partly because I've resisted the temptation to say, oh yes, house prices will go up by 14% in the next 8 weeks, and other kind of nonsenses which, quite frankly, are beyond anyone to call.